Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're plunging into some, well, truly ancient and esoteric wisdom. We're tackling nothing less than the very origin of human intellect. We're looking at excerpts from H.P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, Volume 2, Anthropogenesis, specifically Stanza VII. She calls it the descent of mind. Our mission today is really to unpack this profound text. It describes a pivotal moment in human evolution. The transformation from, well, an intellectually senseless human animal to a thinking being. And this isn't just a history lesson. It's a deep exploration into the roots of what makes us human, maybe why we see so much inequality, and even offers a radical rethinking of evil.
Absolutely. This deep dive gives us a really unique lens on the human condition. We get to consider the metaphysical underpinnings of our intellect and, this complex concept of karma. We'll be looking at how these sons of wisdom are said to have sparked the human mind and how that act established a foundation for everything from genius to, well, fundamental differences in human capacity.
Okay, let's get right into it. Before this descent of mind, what was humanity actually like, according to these sources? It sounds like we weren't quite, well, us yet.
That's exactly right. That's a crucial distinction. The text describes this pre-intellectual being as merely an animal. It possessed consciousness, sure, but it notably lacked self-consciousness.
Okay, consciousness but not self-consciousness. What's the difference there exactly?
Well, it had a general awareness of the world, but it couldn't recognize its own ego as a distinct acting entity. Imagine observing everything around you, but without that inner voice, that feeling of I am observing, that I am.
Right, like being aware, but not aware of yourself being aware.
Precisely. That self-recognition was missing.
So what was missing? Was it just a brain that couldn't quite turn on yet, physiologically speaking?
Fundamentally, yes, that's a good way to put it. While it possessed a latent monad, you can think of that as a divine spark, sort of, and manas, which is the mind or intellect. Its physical brain simply couldn't yet respond to the monastic light, the illumination from that higher intellect.
Oh, okay.
Its higher intellectual potential was just dormant. The text even quotes Shubkin, a Christian Hebraist, who observed that the first Adam possessed only nephesh, which means the breath of life, but not the living, thinking soul. This breath of life, prana, it's a universal life principle, but it's distinctly not the mind in this specific context.
Okay, that makes sense. Which brings us to verse 24, right?
Right.
Where the sons of wisdom, sometimes called the sons of night, decide to incarnate. They're described as seeing these intellectually vile forms of the senseless race. This feels like the real turning point. What happened next? And how does this explain the differences we see?
Yes, this verse is absolutely key. It's central to understanding the profound inequalities that Blavatsky's text links back to these ancient origins. It describes three distinct tiers, you could say, of incarnation. And each tier was linked to their evolutionary readiness and their past karma from previous cycles.
So it wasn't like flipping a switch for everyone at once.
Not at all. This descent of mind was definitely not a uniform event.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, the idea of different tiers of humanity right from the start. Can you walk us through them?
Certainly. The text outlines three main categories. First, there were those who received but a spark. Now, these represent what the text describes as the average portion of humanity at that time, and it includes, and it's important we note these terms are direct quotes from the source, reflecting its historical context, not our endorsement, what it calls inferior races, like some Australians and certain African and Oceanic tribes. Their karmic development, apparently, hadn't prepared them for a full incarnation of these higher intellectual beings. The spark they got is the lower manas, like a ray from the higher ego, which itself remains this pillar of light on its own plane. That spark was all the imperfect vehicle could handle.
Just a spark.
Okay,
what was the second group?
The second group were those who were not ready. Basically, these individuals remained mindless in this specific sense. They were the latest arrivals among human monads, barely evolved from, well, lower animal forms, according to the text. Their monads just hadn't developed the necessary karmic affinity to attract a monastic ray.
So no spark at all for them.
Not in the same way, no. The text refers to them as narrow-headed, and it clarifies this isn't about skill size, but about brains lacking complex convolution, so generally devoid of intellect. But interestingly, it also says these monads had no karma to work out when first born as men, unlike the more advanced races, supposedly burdened by karma. So in this very specific respect, the savage, again, the text's term, is paradoxically described as more fortunate than, say, a civilized genius burdened with karma.
That's quite a perspective. Okay, and the third group.
And finally, there were those who were ready. This group was chosen by the Lords of the Flame and were destined to become sages and spiritual guides. Their karmic state made them fit vehicles. They could form a strong, clear connection, the antaskarana, or bridge to their parent source, their higher ego. And this allowed for true spiritual insight, making the individual consciously immortal.
Wow. So this single event, this descent of mind, is presented as setting the stage immediately for all the intellectual, maybe even spiritual diversity we see, and it links it directly to past evolution and karma. That's a very specific explanation for how karma might play out across generations, right from the beginning of consciousness. Now, moving to another really intriguing part, the text mentions the Lords of the Dark Wisdom. I have to admit, that sounds pretty alarming to a modern ear.
It does, doesn't it? And this is where Blavatsky's esoteric philosophy offers a really profound redefinition of good and evil.
How so?
Well, the text is quite clear. This philosophy admits neither good nor evil per se as independent forces in nature.
Okay, so what are they then?
They're described as two poles of the one and the same thing, necessary contrasts. For the cosmos, they provide balance, contraries and contrasts. For humanity, though, good and evil arise from our own human nature, our ignorance, and our passions. There's no absolute devil, just like there are no absolutely perfect angels, just spirits of light and of darkness.
So, Lucifer, the figure we usually associate with absolute evil, is presented differently here.
Completely differently, yes. Lucifer, in this specific context, is described as the spirit of intellectual enlightenment and freedom of thought.
Enlightenment, freedom of thought. That's unexpected.
It is. He's metaphorically called the guiding beacon through life. He's depicted as the logos, the divine creative principle, in his highest aspect and the adversary in his lowest. And both these aspects are reflected within our own ego, our sense of self. This leads to that really profound phrase, Deus est demon inversus.
Which means?
The god who is an inverted devil. Or maybe the potential for divinity is intertwined with its opposite. The text even states that the logos, the word, is the firstborn brother of Satan.
Wow. Okay, that definitely flips conventional understanding.
Yeah.
So what about other figures like the Asuras, Rudras, Rakshasas from, say, Hindu traditions? They're often the adversaries.
Right, and what's fascinating here is that esoteric philosophy identifies these very beings with the egos that incarnated in witless man, making him consciously immortal.
Wait, so the adversaries are the ones who gave us immortality and consciousness.
That's the idea. Manas, the incarnating ego, is presented as the fallen angel. And it's this manas that shapes whether an individual becomes a god or a devil, depending on their choices and affinities. This act of incarnation is framed as a great sacrifice. It's even called the true crucifixion of the Christos, referring to the divine principle within, because the higher ego, though guiltless, takes on the karma of the personality living on earth.
So these traditionally demonic figures are actually the forces that gifted humanity, intellect, and free will. But it's a gift that's inherently dangerous, a double-edged sword.
Precisely. That's exactly it. The Puranic allegories, when you read them esoterically, support this view. Asuras, for example, are said to come from Brahma's body of night, symbolizing ignorance. Yet Rakshasas, often translated as demons, are sometimes portrayed elsewhere as pious yogis and initiates.
That's quite a contradiction.
It highlights the inner meaning. While we have the power to devour the darkness of ignorance, we also have a responsibility to preserve the sacred truth from profanation. Great intellect, when it's combined with selfishness, can lead to what the text calls black magic. But if that same intellect is applied with altruism, it becomes the means of salvation.
Okay, building on that idea of sacrifice and this risky gift, verse 25 says, "Not all the sons of wisdom were ready to jump into every form immediately. They rejected the self-born, spurned the sweat-born, and would not enter the egg-born." Why refuse? Was it pride, maybe, like a theological interpretation might suggest?
Well, not according to this doctrine. The reason given is more physiological than metaphysical.
Physiological, how so?
Simply put, the primitive human organisms at those early stages were just not sufficiently developed. They couldn't serve as suitable vehicles for these powerful incarnating entities. The Sons of Wisdom essentially waited for more suitable physical forms to evolve.
Ah, so the hardware wasn't ready for the software upgrade, basically.
That's a great analogy, yes. The earlier races were described as too ethereal. They didn't provide a stable enough physical basis for the monastic egos to fully integrate and function. And this waiting period, interestingly, corresponds to the evolution of humanity on the continent of Lemuria, a concept that was actually picked up by some early scientists exploring ancient landmass theories, too.
Lemuria. Okay. So, the sons of wisdom were waiting patiently. Then, verses 26 and 27 tell us when they finally decided, now shall we create. What changed? What made the forms finally suitable?
The key development was the evolution of the androgyne, or the twofold being. This being finally developed a consolidated bony structure. This was the first truly suitable vahan, or vehicle, for their incarnation. And these lords of wisdom are identified with the Kumaras from the Hindu Puranas, these divine beings associated with creation and wisdom who, in those texts, initially refused to create because the earlier, more ethereal races weren't fit.
Right, the Kumaras. And then there's this incredible concept mentioned here, Kriyasakti. What on earth is that? And how does it relate to what the text calls immaculate creation?
Kriyasakti. It's described as a mysterious and divine capacity of thought to produce external, perceptible, phenomenal results by its own inherent energy.
The power of thought to create reality.
Essentially, yes. The ancients believed that through deep concentration of attention and will, one could actually manifest an idea externally. You start by forming a really perfect and detailed model in your imagination. Then you bring your focused will into action, transferring that form from the ideal plane to the objective physical world.
Wow. Can people still do that?
Well, the text says it's mostly dormant in us now, but that this power can be awakened through intense yogi training.
Okay. So the third race, having become this suitable androgyne vehicle, then used Kriyasakti to create the sons of will and yoga. The text calls these the holy fathers, ancestors of the Arhats, Arhats being like perfected sages, right? This sounds like a very different kind of, well, procreation.
It is indeed. They were created, it says, in a truly immaculate way, not begotten physically. It was will acting on phenomenal matter, calling forth primordial divine light and eternal life. These mind-born beings were considered the holy seed grain for future saviors of humanity. And crucially, they were created before the separation of the sexes and before what the text calls the so-called fall into physical generation, which it views as an abnormal diversion of the true original creative power.
This whole discussion about Kriyasakti and non-physical creation, it naturally leads us to the really fascinating details about how early humans did procreate before our current method. The text outlines 3 primeval modes before ours. Can you walk us through those? It gives like a clear picture of this whole evolutionary process.
Certainly. And they really do illustrate the evolution of physical forms, showing why the Sons of Wisdom had to wait for that suitable container for the mind. So first, there was childbirth. The first race apparently oozed from the bodies of the Pitris. These are ancestral spiritual entities that kind of precede physical life. Yes, like an astral image, or chaya. Its life essence was supposedly seated in the spleen. There's a Puranic allegory about Sanjana, the sun's wife, leaving her chaya to bear children, which hints at this kind of sexless procreation. The text even suggests, rather strangely, that if the forms sometimes seen oozing from modern spiritualist mediums could be solidified, we might understand this process better.
Okay, quite different. What was next?
Next came the sweatborn. The second race emerged from drops of vital perspiration.
Sweat. Seriously.
That's the allegory. There's a story of a sage, Kandu, and a nymph, Pramlocha. Her child, Marisha, comes forth from her skin's pores as she wipes away perspiration after being with him for centuries, apparently. The moon is also mentioned as having a powerful psychophysiological role in shaping these early, less physical forms.
Wow, okay. Childbirth, sweat-born. What was the third stage?
The third stage involved the egg-born and the androgyne. The third race initially formed from drops of sweat that grew into huge, ovoid bodies like eggs wherein the human fetus gestated. Then subsequently, this race became androgyne or hermaphrodite, fully dual-sexed in one body.
Androgenic.
Exactly. And this, the text claims, explains why Aristophanes, in Plato's Banquet, describes original humans as these rounded, dual-natured beings who were later split in half by the gods. There's even a Madagascan tradition mentioned telling of the first man having a female emerge from a swelling in his leg. And, modern science offers certain analogs, things like parthenogenesis, or the alternate reproduction methods of polyps where offspring can look very different from their parents. It shows biological forms can evolve in ways unlike immediate progenitors.
That really connects the abstract, metaphysical ideas to the evolving physical body. It paints a picture of the sons of wisdom, quite literally waiting for a suitable physical container before they could ignite the human mind fully. What an absolutely incredible deep dive this has been into the descent of mind. We've seen how Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine presents this truly radical account of human intellectual awakening from what it calls our pre-thinking animal state to the complex, self-conscious beings we are today.
It really does. It offers this comprehensive framework that attempts to tie together the origin of intellect, the complexities of human inequality, through these karmic stages. And maybe most strikingly, it completely redefines good and evil, placing them within a larger dualistic cosmic reality where these contrasts are actually seen as necessary.
And that core idea that our intellect, this gift from the sons of wisdom, is fundamentally a double-edged weapon,
Yeah.
capable of both incredible altruism and profound selfishness. That's a really powerful thought to sit with.
It truly is. This deep dive leaves us with this profound, maybe unsettling idea that our minds, perhaps born from a kind of sacrifice by higher beings,
Yeah.
hold the potential for both our greatest downfall and our ultimate salvation. It all depends, it seems, on how we choose to wield this incredible and maybe sacred power.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Maybe consider this. If our intellect is like a fallen angel, this powerful dualistic force shaping us towards either the divine or the base, how do you choose consciously to direct your own unique spark of wisdom in the world today? Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.